I'd like to sort of bring some elements together, and I think there's also some linkages to the questions that people have been posting in the chat or on the curator platform at first. And the first one is all about, let's say, these dashboards that you were talking about, Sigrid, right? And the fact that we're all looking for this evidence of impact and this data that can support that we're actually generating transformative impact in the food system. And I think many of us here would agree that are we measuring the right things? Are we looking into the right metrics? And many of you have touched on some of the metrics that you use in your work, in your, let's say, assessments of these type of processes to look at how transformation is happening or not, and how, let's say, inclusive it is. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If we were to think of, let's say, the metrics of success or the narratives of success that can really tell us not just that tip of the iceberg of what's transforming on the top, but these root causes that are driving change, what would those things be? And I know this is a challenging question, but I also think it's a question that we can be very pragmatic about. We're not looking at yield, we're not looking at productivity, we're looking at other things. And what are those metrics? If you were to give us some advice, all of these people in the room that are working on food systems, what are the things, the metrics, the indicators that they should pay attention to that you think are so essential in these type of, let's say, systemic processes? I would like to start off with Sylvia. Would you like to briefly share some of your thoughts on this?
I was looking for the unmute button, sorry. It always happens, no matter how much you plan, the unmute button always disappears. Anyway, yeah, so basically, just thinking about it, I think for me now, like basically I was just focusing mainly, like just think about how we can be able to bring this transformation from the ground up and, like the systemic issue, which I would like to say, can work really well when you bring about transformation is being able, as I mentioned in one of my presentations, to be available in the processes from the very beginning. Because if you try to jump in halfway, if you're not really clear on what the processes look like, which is why I also said that, like for us, we normally share with the farmers the calendar, especially for the public participation, when it's going to be, how it's going to work. We go to the county offices, we get the county integrated development plans, the whole plan. It's normally a very big booklet. We bring it there, the farmers go through it step by step. We teach them how to read it. We then now are able to also, like assist them to know how to develop or how to like write a petition, how to be able to engage with local leadership so that, sometimes when they go into these forums, they don't know how to answer. But then now we find like all those small interventions then now end up making, the transformation be more systemic and not so much coming from out, but then coming from within. Yeah.
Amazing. So if that resonates a lot with me of not just the quantity of people that are participating as a metric, right? We have 100 farmers that are participating. Yes, tick the box, but really about the quality and in-depth of their
Mhm.
participation process, how well they're informed, the type of decision making they're involved in, the type of petitions they're
Yes.
forwarding. So I think that's an essential element. Yeah, don't get stuck in just measuring success by
Mhm.
number of people that are joining your meeting. It's really about their contribution, their role, their ownership of not just how the table is shaped and who is on the table, but what is on the menu. I'm taking your words to build on, Jessica. Over to you, Jessica. What would you consider important and valuable metrics that we need to not forget and keep sharp on our radar as we're working on these processes?
Yeah, thanks. Well, would echo what Sylvia said and also what Joanne said in the text and in the chat and a few others around voluntary participation and implementation, maybe around trust. Um, I think I would start by challenging the idea that even when we have good data, that policy follows. I think we spend a lot of time collecting data that it doesn't translate neatly into change. So I think also then beyond metrics, stories of success. go a long way. And I think one of the things that Sylvia made so clear is we're asking about, transformative change, and Sigrid, your presentation also showed transformative change is happening. Whether the data wants to show it or not, no? Whether we can capture the nuance of what we've just heard today through metrics is another question, no? But I think capturing these stories and presenting them with data is critical, so beyond just the quantitative. I would want to see indicators for lobby. I think if we're serious about addressing systemic change, we need to have more transparency and more clarity on who's taking decisions and how they're being influenced, particularly when it comes to healthy diets. And I'd like all of our data to be gender disaggregated, and also age disaggregated so that we can actually start seeing who's being impacted and where this change is happening or not. And maybe I just flag that we have a project on the unmeasurables of transformation. And and we don't know the answer. Maybe in 4 years I can come back and give a better answer, but how do we measure things like care? How do we care for the soil, care? How do we measure things like joy and pride that come from doing this work well and from feeding your community and feeding your family? And this metrics are very bad at capturing, but this is what keeps people motivated. And it sounds maybe a bit pie in the sky or airy fairy, but I think it's critical. And maybe looking beyond metrics is also an option.
Thanks again, Jessica. That's what you're here for, to critically shake us and make us look beyond the usual suspects. Thanks so much for those additions. Sigrid, what would you bring to the table in terms of metrics to make these dashboards a little bit more insightful and purposeful?
I have two answers. So one, let's go for the metrics first, which I will critique later also. But if you have metrics, you need to make sure that they are correct. So for instance, when we did farmer interventions, we assumed that the farmers knew the field size. So the yield of the farmers was calculated based on the assumed idea of the field size. And actually, when we measured the fields, the size of the fields were really different. So there would also the yields changed. So that's the first thing, check the facts on the ground. And this has huge implications actually for very large extensive data sets, such as the FAO, which are of course an indicator, but they are not a fact. So, and I think that's an important aspect about metrics. And secondly, is also about how curious are you, how deep do you want to go? So for instance, we worked on food safety in Vietnam, and we saw consumers buying tomatoes in a safe vegetable store. So the assumption was immediately, this person is concerned about food safety, does this person buys in a safe vegetable store? But then they only bought tomatoes. So the assumption was again, then they're just concerned about tomatoes. But in the end, when we asked them if they always purchase their tomatoes there, they said yes. If they buy also other vegetables there, they said no. And then we said, and why do you buy your tomatoes there? And then they said, for facials. So if we wouldn't have asked deeper, we would have thought that it was because people cared about food safety for the consumption of tomatoes in their everyday life. And we never would have considered this kind of beauty. So again, it's about really understanding what is going on to fill your dashboard. But secondly, and that is even more important, that resonates to what I said before about that metrics are often already outdated when they enter to the policy plate. So they are definitely indicative. They definitely give trends. They definitely measure certain aspects over time. So they have strong value. I really do think so. But on the other hand, policymakers say, I need strong narratives because if I make policy in place, I need to let people understand that sometimes a little pain can result in very large social gain. So, and therewith actually in-depth insights are much more relatable also for the people who vote for our policymakers and understand certain policies. So, and I think that is also what we really need to think about, going beyond the metrics. So, and I think I leave it for here now.
Thanks so much. I like that, going beyond the metrics, definitely something that we should all abide to, even though at times it will challenge the people that support us, that fund us, that engage us in doing some of the work for them. I think that is what food system transformation is also about, that we take our roles and every now and then try to shake things and rethink and come back to wherever the next step should be. Thanks so much, ladies. I'm once again, I'm looking into the chat to see how I can connect some of the questions that people are posing to the main topic we're talking about. And I have thought of one which hopefully will also connect to many of the, let's say, issues people are referring to. So in all three of your presentations, we all talk a lot about agency and the importance of agency and how to strengthen agency. So many of us in the room, either we're working in government positions, as policymakers, either as development practitioners, all of us are evidently consumers, some of us are working with or are farmers ourselves. So I'm very curious to hear your suggestions on what can we do in our roles to strengthen agency of different food system stakeholders that have not had a representative voice in the past, and how can this be, let's say, mainstreamed and supported, not as a nice add-on, but as something that is a transformative driving force for equitative food system transformation. So how do we support agency? How can we strengthen that, particularly focusing on those groups that have not often had a place to voice their opinion? Right, so now I'm shifting it around, and I'd like to start with Sigrid.
Okay. Yeah, I like this question because this is a question I ask myself every day, because what's the meaning of doing the job you do? And I think it is importantly remain utterly curious and genuinely interested, and also be confident to step out of your comfort zone. So I think that is the most important thing, and also connect with other people. So no one has a silver bullet. But there is one. I'm also a historian by background, and I'm so happy I'm a historian, because if there's one thing that we learned from history is that transformation doesn't come from the silver bullets. It doesn't come from just a single intervention. It's by everyone doing their own best effort on themselves and connecting with others and relating to others. So I think that is what we need to keep doing. And everyone that is here on the e-course is already so curious and so interested to connect. So I would say, like, keep that. And then with a good song from the start. So have this happy mode in this very turbulent world. So I would say we will slowly by slowly maybe get there. Because change is the only thing that is consistent. So things are going to change. And let's do our best for the better.
Wonderful takeaway message. Thank you so much there. Jessica, over to you.
Well, I think when I think about agency, we also have to think about structures that allow for agency, no? And I think Sylvia gave a beautiful introduction of the kinds of mechanisms that exist, the structures that exist that allow for her and her colleagues to claim their agency. So I think if we're in positions of decision-making power, or if we have the opportunity to organize workshops and processes, creating the structures that allow for underrepresented and most affected peoples to represent themselves is critical. And this also means we have to put our time and our money and our resources into supporting autonomous organization of effective groups of people, no effective constituencies. And it also means stepping back. So I think it's really important that as academics, we step back and make space for people who are affected and who are engaged at the sort of everyday level of systemic transformation. Not to say that we aren't, because I think, Sigrid, you gave an example of how we all, through our consumption patterns, are. But from a governance perspective, I think it's about that. I think it's about identifying clear mechanisms that allow for that agency to be accessed. No, it's tricky, but yeah, we can't talk about agency outside of oppressive structures.
100%. 100%. Thanks so much. Sylvia, over to you. What would be your takeaway message?
Yeah.
How to work on agency beyond what you're already doing?
So basically, it's like more like Sigrid and nothing new. But basically, what I've written here is, number one, we have to be able to ensure that we have the knowledge. So without knowledge, they always say that knowledge is power. So if you don't have the knowledge, it's going to be very difficult for you to have agency. And beyond that, I want to be able to add, like an icing on the cake, that when you have the knowledge, you don't just have it, but we document it. Like for me, I'm very passionate now about documenting. I've decided I'm going to document the African story of farmers. I'm going to write as much as possible. I'm going to be able to share best practice, what is happening, what works, what doesn't work. So at least we can be able to have this knowledge accessible to as many people as possible, because that also gives the agency. And then finally, as Sigrid said, consistency. So we can't just have hit and run programs. And that's why when you talked about the processes being systemic, is that we want to make sure that the farmers understand the process very well and they're able to be consistent and over. With the last government, it worked out well for us in Kenya, being able to work again with the new governments consistently, put our, concerns on the table and let our voice be heard. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for these incredibly insightful both presentations but also reflections you have been sharing with us. I think indeed we have a very curious, interested, engaged group of participants who have been asking if you are willing to share even more reading material so that they can continue learning and exploring also on your research topics. So please, to everybody, we'll be sharing the presentations, and please feel free to connect to the speakers. And I thought there was a very interesting suggestion that perhaps we can think about of creating a space on our curator platform where we could all share documents and experience about indicators that are looking at food system change, both quantitative and qualitative. And I think this is definitely an interesting space for us to share experiences and to take a next step looking at these very relevant topics when working on food system transformation. On my behalf, thanks to the guest speakers, but also thanks for the amazing crowd. I've never seen so many chat questions and reflections posted during an online session. You've been amazing. Very, very happy to be here and looking forward to continuous interaction on the Curator platform. Over to you, Bram.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you to our three amazing guest speakers. Not much to share more. We'll be sharing the presentations and we'll be sharing the recording as well later today. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank
See you in 2
you.
weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. This was one of the
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
See
Thank
you
you.
again.
Good presentations. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a good time.
Yeah, have a good day.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thanks. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you.